This presentation is actually more about the evolution of activism and how it moved from offline to online, and how the point offers sort of an alternate evolution, and where I think something like that could go in the future. So first I want to talk about what I see as the problems with collective action and why more people aren't involved in activism. And I'll use myself as an example. The reason that I'm not an activist, first and foremost, now I'm somebody who definitely likes to read about the issues, I like to talk about them, I even went to school for public policy, but when it comes time to do things, I don't. And the big reason why, I think, is that most of the options that I have don't feel like I am actually making a difference. So take protesting, for example. Now, a lot of you are probably consultants, developers out there. And if you do a cost-benefit analysis like me, then you say, yeah, I could go to a protest, or I could stay home and work for a couple hours and pay like 5 college kids to go to that protest in my place. So all this stuff, none of it made me feel like participating in these ways really made much of a difference. And the problem is not that I don't care. And I think a lot of people feel this way. It's not that we don't care, we just want a way to actually be able to contribute that feels meaningful. So a second problem is, I often look at the causes that are out there and I say, what are we trying to achieve? What's the goal of this? And here's an example. Everybody's so upset about Sarah Palin. And here's a petition that's saying, no way, no how, Sarah Palin. But it doesn't actually want to achieve anything. That's all it says if you read it. All they're saying is we don't want Sarah Palin. So there's 11,000 people that have joined this, but it's just going to nowhere. It's not being channeled into trying to influence any sort of change. A third problem is that the results are unpredictable. So this is the March for Women's Lives. I don't know if anybody has ever heard of that. It was in 2004. It was the largest protest in the nation's history. Over 1 million people showed up, and also arguably one of the least covered. Only a couple networks covered it during the event, and after the day, it was dead. You never heard of it again. And that's just what happens when your tactics rely on publicity. All bets are off in terms of if something else is happening that day, then you lose. Okay, so the internet came around, and how is that going to help us solve our problems? Well, basically what we did when the internet came around is we took our offline tactics, petitions, letter writing, and we ported them to online. So now we have letters that you can write to your senator by simply doing one click. And here you can see a picture of a protest against the Iraq War that took place in the game Second Life. Now, all these things I call the tactics of inconveniencing ourselves, because that's essentially what you're doing. You're saying, I'm so upset about this issue, and the only thing that I feel like I can do is give a half hour of my time and sacrifice it writing this letter. That's a half hour less of my life that I'll get to spend doing things that I actually want to do. All I can give you is part of my life. But I think people have a lot of other ways that they can influence things other than just trying to throw bodies at a problem and raise a stink. And the real problem is moving these things to the web. It's impossible to make it easier to inconvenience yourself. So as petitions get easier, as it gets easier to write letters and send them off to your legislators, they become less effective. And I think in the short term, like right now, we're seeing these big numbers, 1 million people joining this cause or that cause, and it's impressive, but eventually we're going to recalibrate our expectations, and all this stuff is going to normalize, and they're going to be just as effective or not effective as they were before they came online. Now, the web, I think, has a lot more to offer, but we have to take a step back before we get there. Right now, we are in path dependency, meaning way, way back when we didn't have all this technology, we decided the tactics that we were going to use to solve problems. And we decided on things like petitions and writing letters, right? But then technology has progressed, and as it did, we took that same solution and we evolved it, rather than going back and looking at the original choices we had and saying, maybe if we took one of those original choices, maybe now that we have the internet, that could evolve into being something that's even more effective than what we're doing now. So let's look at that. What does the web really provide us that activism could take advantage of? How does it help solve those problems of collective action? First, communities that are driven by interest and not just geographical location. That's really important. That's things like social networks. Second, the ability to collaborate on solving problems with wikis and crowdsourcing and wisdom of the crowds and all that stuff. Individuals taking their little piece of knowledge and putting it into a central place to create a greater whole than what we could achieve before we had the web. And third, the ability to coordinate our behavior instantly at virtually no cost on an extremely massive level with tools like email. Okay, so we didn't have that when we decided that we were going to use things like petitions, right? And now we do. So what can we really do with that? And that's what the point is. The point is built from the ground up to address the fundamental problems of organizing collective action. And we do it by using this tipping point idea, which has actually been around since the 60s. The way that I like to define it is, if you have a choice between two things, A and B, and right now you're choosing A, at some point, you're going to choose B, right? At some point, something happens that makes B in your best interest. And taking part in a boycott, for example, there is that tipping point that you can actually predict. You can say, once a certain number of people are going to come together and join in on this boycott, then it's worth my time. But me just acting alone, it's not worth it. So what you do is you bring people together and you ask them to do something, but only once you hit that tipping point that you know that everybody's participation is going to make a difference. So this is a widget for a campaign on the point, which anyone can start, and there's 3 parts to every campaign. First, there's an objective, what you're trying to achieve. Second, there's the member pledge, which is what the people who are joining it are promising to do. It can be giving money, or it can be taking any kind of action. And third, there's the tipping point, which is what the creator decides are the conditions under which the collective action will affect the change and achieve the objective that they want. And there are 3 types of tipping points. It can be X number of people joining, it can be a certain amount of money being raised, or it can be someone agreeing to do something. So for example, we all promised to go eat at Steve's Diner, but only once he agrees to start using biodegradable takeout containers. Okay, so the tipping point, the important thing about it is that it's actually predictable. You know, when you read the book, it seems like it's something that you look at in retrospect and you say, that was the tipping point, but you can actually manufacture these. So for example, if BP is dumping waste in our lake, right, and instead of just building a waste treatment facility, then the tipping point is the point at which the cost of people that choose to stop buying from BP is greater than the cost of building that treatment facility. And when you organize action around that tipping point, when you have just enough people involved to offset the costs, then everybody feels like they're taking part in something where their contribution is making a difference. And to show you another example of how that takes place, think of an election when the margin is very small between the candidates. If it's 50-50, then you're probably going to show up at the polls. But if there's a 20-point margin, you're less likely to go. Okay, so I'll show some examples of campaigns that are on the point right now and how they sort of show off why the point is such a great way to organize. So first of all, they're relentlessly results-oriented. Take this Sarah Palin campaign that somebody started this weekend as a contrast. So here people are trying to put an ad in swing states, a full-page ad in the paper that's sort of giving the facts about Sarah Palin's candidacy. The tipping point of this campaign is $21,285, and people are putting their credit cards in there, but their credit card isn't charged until you hit that tipping point. So this is a more results-oriented way than just saying, we don't like Sarah Palin. Second, the point forces you to think about creating rational incentives for change. And what I mean by that is, first of all, it's an incentive that's measurable. That means it can be quantified, that both sides, the people that are involved in the action and the target of the action, can look at it and say, and objectively conclude that it's going to cost them a certain amount. Second, it's predictable, meaning there are no externalities such as PR that could sway one way or another the day of the action and affect the outcome. And third, it's repeatable. There's no element of novelty that's going to affect the outcome. So for example, there's a game called Spore that came out recently, and a lot of gamers are upset about the copy protection schemes that they're using, and the way that they've organized against it is by overloading the Amazon review with a bunch of 1-star reviews. And that's cool, that's worked really well for this campaign or what they're trying to do. But it's not repeatable, because if that became a common tactic, then either Amazon would regulate it tighter or the Amazon reviews would lose their credibility. Okay, so here's an example of a rational incentive. You've probably all seen boycotts for Kentucky Fried Chicken before. This one is trying to get them to specifically adopt suggestions of their animal welfare board, which they know exactly how much it's going to cost them to do. It's about another 2 cents per meal. And they're saying that only once 1 million people join this campaign. They've got a way to go. But only once that happens will they take this action. But that 1 million people, the good thing about it is it will essentially make it in Kentucky Fried Chicken's best interest to make that change. So you're only doing what matters. Here's a really interesting one. The title of this is Bono, Retire from Public Life, and will donate a ton of money to AIDS. And this is all real money that people have contributed. It's about $2,000 so far of people that are saying, only if you retire, we're going to give up this money. So it's a really fascinating, exciting incentive structure, regardless of what you think of the cause. It's just, they're trying to create a situation where Bono feels that he can do more good to the world by retiring. Okay, another problem with organizing collective action is the first mover problem. By being the first person to step out of the gate, you can often be, you can be fired, you can be ostracized from your community, it can be dangerous. Now what the point lets you do is join campaigns anonymously, and then your identity is only revealed once the campaign hits its tipping point and you have safety in numbers. So here's one of people who are trying to make Election Day a de facto national holiday by simply building a critical mass of people who decide not to go to work that day, under the theory that if you have enough people, you can't punish everybody. And what I really like about this kind of approach is it's saying a rule is only a rule if we let it be one. And that's sort of the reality of the internet today. And finally, it enables long shots, radical deviations from the status quo. Now this is my pet campaign. I started this. It's to build a dome over Chicago. Now it seems absurd on the surface, but here's the thing. That's $235,000 of real money that's been pledged so far. We need $10 billion to make it happen. But seriously, how many people would think it's worth like $5,000 to make winter in Chicago obsolete, like I do? When that's the only question that you have to ask, what's it worth to me? And you don't have to worry about what other people are going to do. That's extremely powerful. Okay, now this is just the beginning, what the point is. This is this alternate evolution of organizing collective action online. And where could something like this go? Now, I actually have some insight into this because my future self recorded a video of a future version of The Point and mailed it back to me back through time. And if you go to vimeo.com/thepoint, you can see it. I'm balder, and I'm actually missing an arm for some reason, and I guess in the future we wear scarves. But anyway, I'm just going to hit some highlights of this future to show it off to you. Now, the future version of The Point is a system where what you basically do is you enter, these are my values, these are the things that I care about, and this is my influence. And you run that through the meat grinder of The Point, and it tells you what behavior you should follow in order to leverage your influence to further your values. And here's just an example. So say I was on there and I said, I'm a customer of Paper Palace and I care about rainforest preservation. So what it does is it maps the supply chain, saying that if you care about rainforest preservation, well, it's being impeded by Acme Logging, and they sell to David's Expert Pulping, who sells to Paper Mart. So therefore, I am indirectly supporting the destruction of rainforests by being a customer at Paper Palace. And it's also determined that for Paper Mart to adjust its supply chain, it's going to cost them an additional $400,000, and there are now enough people in the Point system who follow this same supply chain that all of them changing together, it's hit that tipping point, all of them changing together can make it in Paper Mart's best interest to change. Okay, so this is what I call activisiology, the science of activism, where you take you take out the idea of just throwing bodies at it and hoping that something sticks. And there's a couple implications that I want to hit really quick. First is the idea of asocial activism. I think there are two types of groups primarily. There are groups that exist as an end in themselves. That's like your knitting group, where you're primarily involved in it for the social environment that it's creating. And then there are groups that are a means to an end, which I think is what most activists activist groups are. You're coming together as a group because the power of the group is what enables you to get things done. Now, I think those kind of groups can kind of fade to the background, where yes, we're still organizing with other people, but these other people are just kind of cogs in the machine, that you are also one of those cogs, and you don't even need to necessarily know that it's going on because you trust the science. Finally, I think something like this kind of creates a market for social responsibility. Meaning, say a company decides that they want to start burning kittens for fuel. Well, they can kind of like plug that into the points system and see how the supply chain works out to say, no, this really isn't a good idea. We'll lose more money than we'll gain from doing something like this. So I don't think something like this is inevitable, because path dependency is strong, and that's what we're stuck in right now. Path dependency is why we have QWERTY keyboards. It's why we have the Second Amendment. So we have to start thinking about what we can do to get people thinking about solving problems differently. But the potential is worth it. Something like this could fundamentally restructure the way that individuals interact with organizations in a way that I think is much closer to the ideals upon which this country was founded. That's all. Thank you.